Ms. Giraang, 4 minutes to rebut, Vincent, and for your constructive speech on the practicability of eliminating the price ceilings imposed on certain drugs.
Alright. Ladies and gentlemen, members of this House, good evening. The executive order linking the maximum drug retail price has been the source of a lot of issues. But of course, in the end, the executive order has to go through the stringent test of all. Is it constitutional? Mr. Chair, we, the speakers for the affirmative side, believe that PO 821 and the maximum drug retail price ceiling, at least, is unconstitutional because, first, it constitutes as an undue delegation of legislative power, and second, if any, it is an invalid exercise of police power. Legislative powers cannot be delegated, at least the power to make laws. The powers to execute or enforce the laws may be delegated. There are several instances or exceptions in the Constitution provided for valid delegation. For example, the delegation of tariff, the power to tax to the President, emergency powers to the President, also powers to the local government and to the administrative bodies. However, in order to be a valid delegation of power, it is necessary that first, there may be, yes, Your Honor.
We're going near the edge of arguing unconstitutionality, but my question regarding practicability is, in your studies, if you scrap the MRP and you apply all the other provisions like parallel importation, generics, setting the PFAT, and all those things all enforced well, how long do you think will the prices of drugs go down, and by how much?
Okay, sir. I guess we would have to answer that by saying that it takes about 8 to 12 years for a drug to be developed, going through clinical trials and operative trials. So I would say if we took into effect compulsory licensing and early parallel importation, less than 10 years, at least to answer that question. With regard to undue delegation of powers, usually in this case, we need to look at if the delegate status is complete and it is sufficient in standard. Your Honors, ladies and gentlemen, if we look at the Act very closely, if we look at the statement of policy and the section giving the President the power to impose maximum drug retail prices, you will see that the Congress did not mandate maximum drug retail pricing. In the cases of Beltran versus Secretary of Health or Tata versus Secretary of Energy, why they hold the statute as not an undue delegation is because the Congress already laid down the law to be followed and left the discretion to the President or the Secretary to impose or enforce it. In this case, Congress never laid down as a law the imposition of maximum drug retail pricing. It left that law up to the President to exercise. Yes, Your Honor.
This Speaker, there's something that you couldn't understand about these drugs. You can't understand why companies, the same companies, can sell these drugs for decades at a much higher price, much higher price here in the Philippines, and sell it at a much cheaper price in other countries. Would you agree with me that the question of prices is always in relation to financial muscle?
Well, Your Honor, I would have to answer honestly and frankly that of course we take into consideration the profit-oriented orientation of firms. But of course we also take into consideration, and more importantly, that of course there are trade barriers and also other economic factors. The reason why the prices are higher here than in India and Pakistan. And when you look at the records, for example, the comparison and disparities between our prices and the other countries' prices, you will see that they compare them to the prices of branded medicines in the Philippines, not the generic prices in the Philippines. So of course there will be disparity because at the onset, the branded medicines are different in price and larger in prices to the generic medicines. Also, for the last few minutes that I have, I would like to argue that if ever this is not an undue delegation of legislative power, it is an invalid exercise of police power. Police power is the most eminent and most pervasive out of the 3 inherent powers of the government. And in this case, it is not, we cited, there has to be reasonable means.
Speaker, on the issue of practicability, aren't you proposing an impractical means of achieving your proposition? How will you declare the EO unconstitutional? You would have to go to court.
Your Honor, that is something that that is an activity that we'd like to engage in because, of course, it is better to go to court, declare it unconstitutional, than have and wait for the pharmaceutical companies to go bankrupt and hospitals to declare bankruptcy.
Finish up? Finish up?
Yes.
Consent. Is that done?
I rest my case.
All right, Ms. Martinez, last 2 minutes to interpolate Kira.
Sir, are you aware that the President is given the power to impose mandatory or maximum drug retail price under Section 17 of RA 9502?
Yes, he's given that power.
Okay. So do you agree with me that what is violative of the Constitution is the prohibition to earn profit and not the regulation of the profit earned by the pharmaceutical companies?
Profit by itself is unconstitutional. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying do you agree with me that what is violative here in the Constitution is that a law prohibits the company from earning profit and not the regulation of the profits earned?
Yes.
Okay.
That is a violation.
So do you agree, I presume that you are now aware that the combined markup for the manufacturers and retailers for drugs and medicines is pegged at 273%.
Yes.
Okay. So are you aware that despite this the imposition in the maximum drug retail price, that the pharmaceutical companies still earn profit according to the congressional report made by the investigative committee according to the law?
Yes, we do earn profit, not enough R&D.
Okay, so do you agree with me that price control for goods and services has been part in the Philippine economic system for so many years? That price control has been part of our economic system for how many?
Always
so
the last
many
resort.
years? Yeah. Okay, so are you aware that in the case of KMU versus Garcia, the Supreme Court ruled that the LTFRB has the power to impose maximum fares for jeepneys, taxis, and jeepneys, taxis, and buses?
Yes, they do.
Okay, so are you also aware that Employers versus Secretary, the Supreme Court upheld the power of the RTWEB to impose minimum wage on employees?
Yes, they did. In that case, it's acceptable.
Okay, so by analogy, if fares and wages, among others, are regulated by the government, more so with drugs and medicines, which promote the right of the people to have fulfilled needed needs?
No, I don't.
1 minute, 4 minutes to rebut here and argue your case for the feasibility of capping prices of certain medicines.
Honorable judges, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. After almost a decade, the law seeking to ensure access to affordable and quality medicines by majority of poor Filipinos has been passed. It is our side that it is not practicable to scrap the mandatory or the maximum drug retail price because the order is first, complies with the substantive and procedural due process requirement of the Constitution. Second, it is not violative of the Equal Protection Clause. And third, it is issued pursuant to a valid delegation made by Congress to the President. EO 821 is a valid exercise of police power. It complies with the substantive due process because A, it has a lawful object, which is the access to affordable medicines and drugs for the diseases which account for the leading causes of morbidity and mortality. And second, this lawful subject is achieved through lawful means because the law itself is not confiscatory. Per Congressional Oversight Committee report, the pharmaceutical companies will still profit despite the imposition of this MDRP. It does not prohibit the pharmaceutical companies from earning profits. It merely limits the profits earned by these pharmaceutical companies in view of public welfare. To say that it is confiscatory, to say that it is unduly oppressive, is merely speculative because the law or the order will still take effect on August 15. The order also complies with the procedural due process requirement of the Constitution, as ruled in the case of Telcomsat versus Alquas. Publication of the order issued in pursuant of administrative, executive, or legislative function is sufficient. And now going to my second point, the sealed order does not violate the Equal Protection Clause because it has complied with all the requisites laid down by law in the case of Beltran versus Secretary. In this case, there's a reasonable classification because the drugs included in the list are for diseases that account for the leading causes of morbidity and mortality. In fact, in 2008, yes, Your Honor.
I'm a little confused on whether we're talking about practicality or not. Because you're talking about whether the EO is valid or not. But anyway, would it be better, would you agree with me that it would have been much easier, much simpler, better to just leave all controls and allow